Her name was Amara. She had spent 26 years learning how to be useful. Not happy, not free, just useful. The kind of girl who woke up early, not because she wanted to, but because someone always needed something before the sun finished deciding whether to show up or not. The kind of girl who packed her own bag for a trip she didn't choose, smiled at the gate, and told herself that this was fine, this was all completely fine, while her hands did the thing they always did when something was not fine at all. They counted. Door frames, steps, tiles on a floor, anything with a number, anything that didn't move. She was counting the stitches on the seat of the carriage when it pulled through the palace gates. 17 lanterns on the colonnade, evenly spaced, same distance between each one, measured to the inch, like whoever hung them had a ruler in one hand and a very particular idea about beauty in the other. Not beauty, actually, she corrected herself before the carriage finished rolling to a stop. Not beauty. Control. There is a difference. She had learned that difference the hard way, at a young age, in a house that was also very clean and very quiet and very arranged. She stepped out. The stones were pale gold in the evening light. The kind of light that makes everything look like a painting and nothing look like real life. She had heard about this palace her whole life. Everyone in her village had. The Alpha King's Palace. The place where decisions got made that rippled all the way down to places like her village. Places with no name on most maps. Places that existed in the margins of other people's importance. She had never thought she would stand here. She had also never thought her father would sell her in the language of honor. That was the thing about being sold that way. It was very clean, very arranged. He had sat across from her 3 weeks ago at the kitchen table, with both hands flat on the wood, the way he always sat when he had already decided something and was presenting it to her as a conversation. There would be a visit, he said, one evening. A diplomatic obligation. The alliance required a gesture of good faith, and she was... Here he had paused, as if searching for a word that would make it sit better in her mouth. She was the right gesture. She had looked at his hands on the table. She had said, "Of course," the same way she always said it, smoothly, no heat in her voice. All the heat somewhere behind her sternum, just sitting there, warming nothing. He had sent her off 3 weeks later with a sealed letter for the palace steward. She had opened it in the carriage, somewhere between the second and third valley, when the road got bumpy enough that no one would notice her hands shaking. She had read every word. Then she had held the corner of the letter to the carriage lamp until it caught, and she had watched it burn down to her fingers, and she had not flinched. She remembered every word anyway. Memory is like that. You can burn the paper. The paper was never the problem. One evening. That was the agreement. One evening. A dinner. A demonstration of good faith. And then she would leave. Her father had even written the departure time, as if a departure time were a kindness, as if writing it down meant it was a promise. She stood in the palace courtyard and counted the lanterns one more time. 17. Still 17. A woman appeared, middle-aged, gray at the temples, the kind of face that had learned to be pleasant so long ago that pleasantness had just become the face. She introduced herself as the head of household staff. She said the Alpha King was finishing something and would be with her shortly. She said this in a voice that made shortly sound like it could mean anything at all. Amara said, "Of course." She was taken to a waiting room. The room was the kind of room that knew it was a waiting room and had feelings about it. Everything in it was expensive in a very deliberate way. The kind of expensive that isn't about comfort, but about reminding you where you are, and more importantly, where you are not from. The chairs had legs that curved in ways chairs did not need to curve. The curtains were a color that didn't have a common name. There was a vase on a side table that probably cost more than every piece of furniture her family owned combined, and it held 3 flowers, arranged with the same measured precision as the lanterns outside, and she hated it a little. The vase. Not the flowers. The flowers hadn't done anything. She sat down. She did not touch anything. This was not because she was afraid to. She had been poor but not ashamed of it. There was a difference, and she knew the difference well. She did not touch anything because she understood what it meant to want something you were only allowed to look at, and she did not want to teach her hands that lesson again in a new room. She sat and waited and counted the flowers. 3. She counted the petals on the nearest one. 11. She counted the tiles she could see from her chair. 42. But that wasn't all of them, and not knowing the full number itched at her the way an unfinished sentence itches at a person who cares about language. She was on her third count of the curtain's visible folds when he walked in. She knew it was him immediately, and not because of any of the things people usually say when they describe someone like him. Not because of how he looked, not because of the way he carried himself, though he did carry himself the way someone carries a thing they've been holding so long they've forgotten it has weight. She knew it was him because the room changed when he entered it. Not dramatically, not the way rooms change in stories, more the way a room changes when the temperature drops by 2 degrees. You don't necessarily notice it right away, but something in your body does, some animal part of you that is older than your manners. He was looking at her the way she imagined cartographers look at coastlines, not with admiration, not with desire, just with this very precise attention, like he was updating a map he'd been working on for a long time. She looked back. He crossed the room and stopped at a distance that was respectful and also utterly unapologetic, like his idea of courtesy and other people's idea of courtesy were close but not identical. Amara, he said. Just her name. No greeting attached to it. No pleasantry parked in front of it. Just her name, like a full sentence, like the period was already there. Yes, she said. Same temperature as him. He studied her for half a beat, and then something shifted at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, more like a smile's skeleton. You're not what I expected, he said. What did you expect? Someone easier to read. She held his gaze and said nothing. Because saying nothing was also an answer, and she had learned that a long time ago, and she watched him register it, and this was the thing that she had not expected. She watched him look almost satisfied when he did. Dinner is ready, he said. She followed him out. The table was long enough to make a statement. They sat at one end of it, across from each other, which meant the statement the table was making was ignored entirely, which she thought said something about him, a man who inherits a long table and refuses to sit at opposite ends of it from his guest. That is a choice. She was not sure yet what kind of choice. There were 6 dishes. Real dishes. The kind of food that took time and care, not the kind of food that was arranged to look like it took time and care while actually being about performance. She ate. He watched her eat, the first time, with the expression of someone watching a thing they weren't sure they were allowed to find interesting. Then he stopped watching and ate too, and she appreciated that. The not watching. Some people, when they have power over you, can't stop performing their power. They watch you eat to see if you're grateful. He just picked up his fork. How long is the journey from your home? He asked. 3 days. You made it in 2. She looked at him. I asked, he said simply. She put her fork down for a moment. Just a moment. Then she picked it up again. The carriage driver was efficient, she said. The carriage driver pushed through the second night because he was told to. Then perhaps you should ask the carriage driver about the journey. The corner of his mouth again, that almost smile. He had it on a short leash, and she could not tell yet whether that was control or habit. Your father speaks highly of your composure, he said. My father speaks highly of anything that makes him look good by association. She had not meant to say that out loud. She was not sure what happened. Something about this room, this table, the way he spoke to her without the usual layer of pity or condescension or theatrical respect that men with power usually draped over conversations with women like her. She had been spoken to like a child, and spoken to like a problem, and spoken to like a favor being done, and this, whatever this was, had caught her unprepared. He did not react with discomfort. He did not gloss over it. He simply heard it. That is a very honest thing to say in this palace, he said. Is honesty unusual here? It is uncommon at dinner tables in general. Then perhaps the problem is dinner tables. He looked at her for a moment, that was slightly too long to be polite, and not long enough to be rude, and sat in the exact uncomfortable middle where she felt it most. What do you want? He asked. Not for your family, not from this alliance, for yourself. She counted to 3, fast, internal, automatic. 1, 2, 3. the way she counted to buy time when a question arrived that she wasn't ready for. She was deciding whether the question was a weapon or a gift. With men like him, you couldn't always tell. Sometimes they asked what you wanted because they had already decided, and your answer was just decoration. Sometimes they asked because they genuinely didn't know yet, and your answer would matter, and that was almost worse, because then you had to decide how much of the truth to spend. She looked at her plate. There was a fig on it. Small, dark, perfect. She moved it to the edge of her plate with her knife. Gently, deliberately, pushed it to the very rim and left it there. She looked up. "I want to be asked about what I want more often," she said. "Not tonight. In general. In my life." He held her gaze. "And in the meantime, I eat the other things on my plate and don't make a scene about the fig." She watched him process that. She watched him decide not to ask her to explain it. That decision, the not asking, was the first thing he did that she respected. They ate. They talked. About her village, about the roads, about the trade patterns along the valley routes, about the way weather comes in from the north and what it does to the harvest cycles. She had opinions about all of it, real opinions, built from real observation, from growing up in a place that required you to understand practical things if you wanted to eat. He listened in a way that most people don't, which is to say he didn't listen while waiting to speak. He listened and then was quiet for a beat after she finished, like he was actually putting what she said somewhere. This was alarming. She was used to people half listening. Half listening she could manage. Half listening left room for her to half be there, to keep the warm part of herself back behind her sternum where it was safe. This full, unhurried attention did not leave that room. She found herself saying things she had not planned to say. Not personal things, not the deep things, but true things, which were worse in their own way. The candles had shortened considerably by the time a servant appeared in the doorway. The carriage, the servant said, had been prepared for her departure. She looked at the candles. Half of what they had been when she sat down. Outside the tall windows, the sky had gone fully dark. She set her napkin on the table. "Thank you for dinner," she said. The words were correct and tasted like cardboard. "There is something I'd like to show you," he said. He had not moved. Had not reached for his own napkin, was sitting very still in the way of someone who knows that stillness is more persuasive than motion. "The carriage will wait." She looked at him. He looked back. "The library," he said. "It has maps. Old ones. I think you'd find them interesting." She should have said no. She knew the architecture of what happened when women who had been sent as diplomatic gestures followed men like him to private rooms on the strength of finding something interesting. She had been raised by a man who spoke in the language of honor and meant something else entirely. But he hadn't asked her about herself to gather leverage. He had asked her the way a person asks when they want to know, which was rarer than gold and twice as dangerous. She stood up from the table. "Lead the way," she said. The library was real. She had half expected it to be something else dressed up as a library, the way things in palaces could be symbols of themselves, rather than the actual thing, but it was a real working library, which meant it had the smell of a real working library, which is one of the best smells available to human beings, and she was not immune to it. Books that had been opened and read and opened again. Ink and old paper and the particular dusty warmth of a room that held a lot of accumulated thought in a small space. He moved through it like he knew where everything was without having to look, which meant he actually spent time here, which meant the library was not for show. She walked slowly, looking. There were histories she recognized, and histories she didn't. There were books in languages she couldn't read, and a few in languages she could. There was an entire wall of bound documents she suspected were trade records going back a very long time. There was a section that looked like navigation, and a section that looked like natural history, and a section in the far corner that she couldn't immediately categorize. "You actually use this room," she said. "Yes. Not for meetings. Not for appearances. No." She touched the spine of a book. Just the spine. Lightly. "It shows," she said. He had spread something on the long central table. She came to stand beside it. It was a map. Old, she could tell immediately from the paper, the slight browning at the edges, the style of the lettering. Old enough that the borders on it bore no relationship to the borders that existed now. A map of before anyone had drawn lines and called the lines law. She looked at it for a long time. She put her finger on a spot in the southeast corner, a region with no name on the parchment, just the suggestion of hills, the line of a river, a cluster of marks that might be settlements. "That's where you're from," he said. She took her finger off the map. She looked at him. "I looked," he said. Flat. No apology offered, no performance of embarrassment, just a fact, delivered in the same way he delivered all his facts, which was without decoration. She was very still for a moment. The anger came, the sweet kind, the familiar kind that she reached for the way other people reached for a door frame in an earthquake, not because it would save her, but because it was solid, and she knew exactly where it was, and her hands knew how to hold it. The anger did not scare her. Nothing about anger scared her. She had been using it like a flotation device since she was old enough to understand that she needed one. "For the Alliance," she said. Her voice was flat too. She could do flat. She had learned from someone who was very good at it. He looked at her. That cartographer look again. Updating something. "I look into everyone involved in the Alliance," he said. "That's not an answer to what I asked. You didn't ask a question. I made a statement. You know what I meant." He was quiet for a moment. And then, "I've read hundreds of Alliance documents. Background information on dozens of people. I have never wanted to know more than the file told me." She stared at him. "Until the file on your village," he said. She did not answer. There was a fire crackling somewhere behind her, and the sound of it was very loud in the silence that followed. She looked at the map instead of him. She looked at the spot she'd touched, the cluster of unnamed marks, the river drawn by someone who had walked beside it, and not just decided it existed from a comfortable distance. She had been born in that cluster of marks. She had played in that river. She had left it with nothing but the things she could carry, and some of those she'd had to leave too. She did not say any of this. She picked up the map, gently, the way you pick up something that has no duplicates in the world, and she looked at it up close. At the handwriting in the margins, someone's observations, someone who had been there, in that nameless cluster, and thought it worth noting. "Who drew this?" she asked. "I don't know," he said. "It came with the collection when the palace was built. It's older than the palace. So there have been people in that valley longer than there has been a palace here." "Yes. That seems like important information. Most people don't think so." She set the map down. "Most people find it easier not to." He stood on the other side of the table. Not close. Not performing distance either. Just there. Present in the room with her the way a piece of furniture is present, except entirely unlike a piece of furniture, because furniture does not look at you like it is paying attention on purpose. "What was it like?" he asked. "Growing up there." "Small," she said. "Loud in summer, quiet in winter. We knew everyone and everyone knew us, and that was both the best thing and the hardest thing about it. You left." "I left." He waited. She did not offer more. She gave him the 2 words and nothing else. The door shut cleanly behind them, and she watched him decide again whether to push it. He decided not to. This was the second thing he did that she respected. They moved through the library slowly. He showed her a navigation section, charts of stars and tidal patterns and wind currents, things that mattered to people who needed to find their way across distances that would swallow them if they got it wrong. She asked questions, real questions. He answered them without explaining things she hadn't asked him to explain, which is a skill more people should develop, and almost no one does. She forgot about the carriage. That was the thing she wouldn't realize until much later, when she was trying to reconstruct what had happened to her that night. Not in the sense of what had been done to her, but in the sense of what had happened to her own self, from the inside. She forgot about the carriage. She forgot about the measured lanterns and the sealed letter, and the departure time her father had helpfully included. She forgot about counting. She only realized she had stopped counting when she looked at the window and saw the sky beginning to do that complicated thing it does before sunrise. that slow argument between darkness and light that the darkness always loses but makes interesting. She had been in this room for hours. She had not noticed. The fire had burned down low. The library was warmer than it had been when they entered, and the candles had been replaced at some point by a servant who had moved through the room like a shadow, unobtrusive, without her even registering it. She was standing at a shelf in the far corner with a book open in her hands, not the unmapped region, not the navigation section, but the corner she hadn't been able to categorize. It turned out to be philosophy. Old philosophy, translated badly, with margin notes from several different hands across what looked like generations, arguments conducted in the margins of someone else's argument, the world's least convenient debate. She became aware that he was watching her read. She looked up. He was leaning against the opposite shelf with his arms folded, and his expression was doing something she didn't have a name for yet. Not desire, or not only desire, something older than that, something that looked almost like recognition, which made no sense, because he didn't know her and she didn't know him, and they had been in the same room for one evening. "I should go," she said. "Yes," he said. She closed the book. She looked at the shelf where it belonged, and she put it back exactly where she had found it, because someone had organized this library with intention, and she was not going to undo that. She found her coat on the chair, near the door where she had left it. She put it on. She turned toward him. He had not moved. "You had a carriage waiting," he said. "I know. I sent it home 4 hours ago." She stopped. "Another can be arranged for morning," he said. "There is a guest room. The housekeeper will show you." She looked at him for a long time. Long enough that most people would have looked away, or added something, or softened the silence with an explanation. He didn't. He just let the silence be what it was. "You should have asked me," she said. "Yes," he said. "I should have." No argument. No excuse. Just the acknowledgement. Clean. Undecorated. She was furious. In the sweet way. In the familiar way. Reaching for it. Grateful for it. The anger was so much easier than the thing underneath the anger, which was that she had been in this room for hours and had not wanted it to end, and she could not afford that. Women like her could not afford that. She knew exactly what happened when women like her started wanting things in palaces like this. "You want me to stay," she said. "Yes. Because of the alliance." He looked at her the way he had looked at her across the dinner table, with that long pause that was not silence, but waiting. "No," he said. She heard it land. She looked away. At the window. The sky was losing its argument with the light, pale gold creeping in at the horizon's edge. And outside, in the colonnade, the lanterns were still burning, all 17 of them. She looked at them for a moment. She had a very specific thought. Those lanterns should have burned out hours ago. Oil lanterns don't last the whole night. Someone had tended them. Someone had gone out in the dark and refilled them or replaced them, or done whatever you do to make a lantern burn past its natural time. She thought about that. She didn't say anything about it. "You could have just said the carriage would wait," she said. "You could have asked me to stay without taking the choice away first." "I know. That's not an apology." "No," he said. "It's not." She turned back to look at him. He was watching her with that patient attention that she still didn't know how to handle, that full, unhurried interest that left no room for her to half be there. "You don't apologize much," she said. "I try not to say things I don't mean," he said. "I am not sorry I kept you here. I am sorry I didn't give you the choice in the same breath. Those are different." She looked at him for another long time. "I was promised one evening," she said. "That was the agreement. One evening." "Yes," he said. "The evening is over." "Yes," he said. "It is. So what is this?" He was quiet for a moment. Really quiet. Not the strategic quiet he used at the dinner table. Not the cartographer's quiet while he was updating his map. A different kind. The kind people go quiet when they are deciding how much of a true thing to say. "I don't know what this is," he said. "I've been in this palace for 11 years. I have had dinners with hundreds of people in service of this kingdom. I have never wanted any of them to stay." She breathed in. She breathed out. "Stay," he said. "Not because of what your father agreed to, not because of any document, because of the reason you moved the fig to the edge of your plate." She felt something crack open in her chest. Not painfully, like the way ground cracks in spring. Not breaking, just making room for what comes next. She had moved the fig because she was tired. She had been tired for 26 years of eating around the things she actually wanted, of accepting the meal she was given and not making a scene about the parts she didn't want. She had moved it and left it there because she had decided, in that one small moment, that she would not eat a thing she didn't want just because it was on her plate. He had seen it. She hadn't known anyone was looking. She looked at the lanterns again. 17. Still burning. You had them tended, she said. He said nothing. Through the night, she said. Someone went out there in the dark and kept them going. They light the colonnade, he said. They were lit for me, she said. When I arrived, and someone made sure they stayed lit. He did not confirm it. He did not deny it. He held her gaze and said absolutely nothing, and in the silence she heard everything he wasn't saying, which was considerable. She should have been angrier. She had every right to be angrier. He had sent her carriage away without her knowledge or her consent, had made a decision about her evening with the same easy authority that her father made decisions about her life, and she had spent 26 years accumulating a very legitimate grievance with men who did exactly that. But her father had never kept a lantern burning for her. Her father had never asked what she wanted in the same sentence as her name. Her father had never looked at an old map and traced a river to a nameless cluster of marks and wanted to know more than the document told him. She understood that comparisons were dangerous. She understood that the bar she was measuring against was very low, and that a man clearing a low bar did not make him the right man. She understood all of this. She also understood that she was 26 years old, and she was tired of standing in rooms and not touching anything. I will stay until morning, she said. Something happened to his face. Not dramatic, not the way faces change in stories. Very small. Like a room where the temperature shifted 2 degrees. You could miss it if you weren't paying attention. She was paying attention. The housekeeper. I'll find her, Amara said. I don't need escorting. She moved toward the door of the library. She stopped when she reached him, because he was standing in a way that meant she would pass close to him, and she stopped and looked up at him and said, "The fig, for what it's worth. I didn't move it because I don't like figs." He held her gaze. "I know," he said. She walked out of the library. She walked down the hall. She found the housekeeper's quarters by following the one light still burning in that wing of the palace, which she thought was probably not an accident either. She was shown to a room, not enormous, not theatrical, just a room with a window and a bed and a pitcher of water and enough space to breathe. She sat on the edge of the bed. The window faced the colonnade. She could see the lanterns. She counted them, 1 through 17, slow, the way she counted when she was using the counting to settle something inside herself rather than to know the number. She already knew the number. She had known it since she arrived. 17. She got to 17 and stopped. She sat with her hands in her lap and looked at the lanterns and tried to decide what she thought about all of it. About the evening, about the library, about a man who looked at old maps and sent carriages home and kept lanterns burning and asked what she wanted with his whole attention and then did not ask her to explain the fig. She could not decide. She thought about her father's letter, the one she had burned in the carriage, the one she still knew every word of. He had written it as instructions for her behavior, a list of things to say and not say, a list of ways to be. He had written it the way he wrote everything, clean, arranged, very certain about the correct way for things to go. He had not written it as if there were any version of this evening in which she might have something to learn, or feel, or decide for herself. He had not written it as if she was someone who would push a fig to the edge of her plate and have the right man notice. She pulled off her shoes. She lay back on the bed still in her traveling clothes and looked at the ceiling. The ceiling was plain. She did not count the cracks in it. That was new. She was asleep within minutes, which was also new. She was not usually a person who slept easily in unfamiliar rooms. Her body usually spent the first hour of any strange bed cataloging all the ways it was wrong before eventually surrendering out of sheer exhaustion. Tonight it just let go, like it had decided, somewhere below the level of her decisions, that this was all right. She would argue with that decision later. In the morning, she woke to light, not the aggressive morning light of her village, which came in flat and practical, and said, "Up." The light here was different. It came through curtains that filtered it into something softer, something that arrived more like a suggestion than a command. She lay still for a moment and looked at the ceiling and listened. The palace was quieter in the morning than it had been in the evening. She had expected it to be the other way around. Palaces in her imagination were busy in the morning with the business of being palaces. But what she heard was mostly birds, and wind through something outside, and the very faint sound of someone far away in the building doing something with crockery. She sat up. Her shoes were beside the bed where she'd dropped them. Her coat was on the chair. Everything was as she had left it, which meant no one had come in while she slept, which she had half wondered about. She had gone to sleep wondering about it. She had told herself she was not worried. She had counted the lanterns one more time from the window before she lay down. 17, still 17, and she had thought, a man who keeps lanterns burning for a guest he barely knows is a man who wants to be thought well of. She had also thought, or a man who doesn't let things go out. She stood up. She went to the window. The colonnade was empty in the morning light. The lanterns were there, unlit now, since they didn't need to be lit, since the sun was doing the job. But there, all 17, standing in their measured row like they were waiting for evening. She thought about what it would mean to stay. Not for the morning. She had already decided the morning. Beyond the morning. She thought about it the way she thought about all the hardest things, which was to look at it from the outside first, like she was someone else observing a woman in a window, looking at 17 unlit lanterns and deciding her own future. The woman was 26. The woman was here on borrowed time, borrowed by a father who had phrased it as an honor. The woman had spent an entire night in a library reading philosophy with a man who didn't tell her what to feel, which was the smallest possible thing and also enormous. The woman had stopped counting for the first time she could remember. That scared her more than any of the rest of it. She washed her face with the water in the pitcher. She put on her shoes. She put on her coat. She made the bed, neatly, with the habit of someone who has made their own bed every day of their life and does it without thinking. She went downstairs. He was in the dining room, just sitting with tea and documents, in the ordinary way of a person who has a morning routine they've been keeping for years and hasn't changed it because of anything that happened the night before. He looked up when she came in. "Tea?" he said. She sat down. "Tea," she said. The housekeeper appeared and poured. She set down bread and fruit and left again with the quiet efficiency of someone who was very good at reading rooms. They sat across from each other in the morning light. "I need to know something," Amara said. He set his documents down, not to the side, down, on the table, face down, like the conversation she was starting was the only one that was happening now. She noticed that. "The carriage," she said. "If I ask for it today, it will be arranged," he said. "You can leave whenever you want. And my father's agreement has been fulfilled. You came, you stayed the evening. Whatever he told you the obligation was, it's done." She looked at him. "Then why did you ask me to stay?" she said. "If the obligation is done, if there's nothing you need from me for the alliance, why?" He held her gaze across the table. In the morning light he looked different than he had in the candlelight. Not worse, just more ordinary, more like a person and less like an institution. There were lines around his eyes that she hadn't seen last night. His hair was not as arranged. He was drinking from a chipped mug, not a palace mug, the kind of mug that had survived a long time by accident rather than intention, the kind you keep because it's yours, even when everything around you is replaceable. She looked at the mug. "Because I've been in this palace for 11 years, he said, "making decisions for other people, about trade and land and roads and water and alliances and who needs what from whom. I am very good at it. I am not sure I remember the last time I did a thing for no reason other than that I wanted to." "And you want to what?" "Talk to you," he said. "More, that's all." It was such a small answer. She had been prepared for something larger, something she could push back against with appropriate force. Talk to you more. 3 words. 4, with the "that's all." She looked at her tea. "I have a life," she said. "It is not a large life, and it is not a comfortable life, and most of it was not chosen by me, but it is mine. I have people who depend on me. I have things I'm supposed to go back to." "I know," he said. "I can't just stay in a palace because one dinner went well." "No," he said. "You understand that." "Yes." She looked at him. "Then what are you asking?" He wrapped both hands around his chipped mug. He looked at it. She noticed that he looked at objects when he was thinking. Not away, not into the middle distance, but at whatever was immediately in front of him, like he needed something solid in his line of sight, when his thoughts were doing something complicated. "I'm asking if you want to," he said. "Stay. Not because your father arranged it, not because the kingdom needs it. If you want to, for as long as you want. And I'm asking, and this is the part I've been sitting here practicing since before you came downstairs, which I am not going to pretend otherwise. I'm asking if I could come to your village. At some point, if that is something you would allow." She stared at him. He had been sitting here practicing. She thought about the burned letter in the carriage. She thought about the 17 lanterns. She thought about the fig on the edge of her plate, and his face when he referenced it, and the old map with the nameless cluster, and his hands on the chipped mug, and the philosophy books in the corner, with 3 generations of arguments in the margins. She thought about stopping counting. She thought about how the ceiling didn't have any cracks she felt the need to track. "You would come to a village with no name on most maps," she said. "Yes." "To what end?" "To see it," he said. "To see where the river goes that's on that map. I don't have a more sophisticated answer than that. To have a reason to go somewhere for no reason other than that I want to." She was quiet for a long time. The birds outside did what birds do in the morning, which is talk over each other without resolution. "I'm going home today," she said. "Yes." "And you'll arrange the carriage?" "Yes." "And if you come to my village," she paused, "you come as a person, not as an institution. You come without the carriage, and without the household staff, and without the weight of whatever this palace means to my father, and to everyone who sent me here." He looked at her across the table. "Yes," he said. She picked up her tea. She drank it. It was good tea, not fancy, not performative, just good. She thought about the fact that his mug was chipped and the tea was good, and the library was real, and none of that added up to a reason to make a decision this large, and none of that made her not want to make it. "There is a market," she said, "on the 3rd Friday of every month. If you come on that Friday, you'll see the village at its best. The rest of the time, it's just the village." He was very still. "3rd Friday," he said. "3rd Friday," she said. She set down her tea. She stood up from the table. She straightened her coat. "The carriage," she said. He stood. "I'll tell them now." She walked toward the door. She stopped in the doorway and looked back at him, standing by the table with his chipped mug and his face doing that thing it did, that small temperature change thing she had learned to read over the course of one night. "The fig," she said. He waited. "I've been moving the fig to the edge of the plate my whole life," she said. "I have never once had anyone name it." She walked out. She walked down the corridor. She walked past the room where she had waited, with her hands in her lap, and not touched anything. She walked through the entrance hall and out the front doors and into the morning. The colonnade, 17 lanterns, unlit, waiting. She walked past them and did not count. She had already decided she would not count them this time. She walked past all 17 of them, and she kept walking, and she did not look back, and she did not count, and the carriage was at the end of the colonnade, and the driver opened the door, and she got in, and the door closed, and the horses moved. She did not look back at the palace. She looked forward, at the road, at the valley, at the long way home through the hills, to a village that had no name on most maps but existed, fully and completely, in the margin of the world, the way things that are real exist whether they are named or not. She sat with her hands in her lap, open, not counting. The market happened on the 3rd Friday of the following month. He came. He came the way he said he would, without the carriage, without the staff, in clothes that were well-made but not unmistakably palace clothes. He arrived in the morning, on foot from where he had left the horse at the edge of the village, and he stood at the entrance of the market and looked around with the expression of someone who has arrived at a place they have thought about more than they intended to, and is now updating their map. She saw him from across the market. She was at a stall, a fruit stall, because she had come for fruit and for the woman who ran the fruit stall, who was 80 years old and had known Amara since she was small and had opinions about everything and shared them freely. She was in the middle of a conversation about the price of late-season melons when she saw him. She did not wave. She finished the conversation about the melons. She bought 2. She said goodbye to the 80-year-old woman who had opinions. She turned and walked across the market to where he was standing. He had found, in the time it had taken her to buy the melons, a stall that sold old books. He was looking at one when she reached him. She stood beside him. He looked up. "Third Friday," she said. "Third Friday," he said. She looked at the book in his hand. Navigation. Star charts for a sea. She was pretty sure neither of them had ever sailed. "I'll show you the river," she said. He put the book down. They walked out of the market, through the village, past the house where she had grown up and did not point it out, past the well, past the old stone wall that had been old as long as anyone could remember, down the path through the grass to where the river ran, clear and cold and indifferent to the significance anyone might attach to it. She stood at the bank. He stood beside her. "There's no name," he said, looking at the river. "There doesn't need to be," she said. "It knows what it is." He looked at the river for a long time. She stood next to him and did not count anything at all. The river moved. The light moved with it. That was the whole story. All of it, from the lanterns to the market to the unnamed river. No resolution offered, no promise attached. Just a woman who stopped counting, and a man who came on a third Friday with no carriage and no title, and stood beside her at a river that had no name and needed none. The rest was still being written. The fig stayed at the edge of the plate. That was enough.